Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Vinyl Den, your channel for record collecting by record collectors. I'm Nick.
I'm Ian.
Today we're talking about albums that we were really disappointed by. There's a bunch of links down below. You got links for the Vinyl Den Facebook group, for the merch page, for the Spotify and Apple Music playlist that I put together every week, and the Patreon page. So make sure you check all that out. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you give me a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified every time I release new episodes. So the first album I've got, so this is actually an EP. It was released in 1995. Their first album was released in 94, and I was never a huge fan of it, but there was definitely some really good stuff off of it. It really made me, I guess, really excited for this EP when it came out. It's got one great track on it. I was really disappointed by the rest of it. And then It Smells Like Children by Marilyn Manson. So Portrait of an American Family came out in 1994. I'm not the biggest industrial fan. I really do like that album. I don't have a copy of that on vinyl. I definitely I want to track down a copy of it. I don't think Marilyn Manson stuff is ever going to get reissued. I guess I should probably preface all that by saying that. So this is a bootleg. If you want a copy of his stuff, you're going to have to find a bootleg of it out there, or unofficial pressing, whatever you want to call it. But so this is the album or the EP that has the cover of Sweet
Dreams by the Eurythmics.
Yeah, by the Eurythmics on it. That was the one big track on here, and that was the reason I bought this, because I'd heard Portrait of an American Family. I liked that album, and I heard that cover, and I was like, oh man, I was what, 15 when this album came out. So I tracked this down, bought it on cassette, went home and listened to that like one time through. And to be honest, there's really nothing else even remotely redeeming on this album outside of that one track.
Yeah, I've never been a big Marilyn Manson fan.
Yeah.
I don't like industrial rock, because that was big. Nine Inch Nails I can tolerate, because, I mean, they've got some better songs.
Yeah.
But I can't really get into Marilyn Manson that much.
Yeah.
So my first one is, so in the late 80s, Motley Crue was huge. I loved Motley Crue. I liked their first album, their second album, and then Dr. Feelgood came out. So I had that. So I obviously wanted to get all their other albums. I got Theater of Pain. Hate it. I do not like any song on this album, really. And it was so disappointing, because I was like, they've had these other three albums. I was almost equally disappointed with Girls, 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 but at least it has that song on it, so that's a good song. This I don't like any of the songs on this. I don't like Home. I don't like
I think Home Sweet Home is a good song.
I don't like it.
Outside of that song, though, I'll agree with you. I mean, the band doesn't even like this album. This is one that...
I mean, even their cover, Smoking in the Boys' Room, was huge at the time. I don't like it.
Actually, I completely forgot that was even on this, and I'll still agree that this is not
a good album. It's just... I love the album cover, but it's not a good album, and I was so disappointed when it came out.
Yeah, because I was the same. I got into Motley Crue with Dr. Feelgood,
right.
and I kind of went back from there.
Me too.
I think the second album I listened to from Motley Crue was Shout the Devil, which I absolutely love.
Yeah, it's a good album.
And then I went from Shout the Devil to Theater of Pain, and I'm like, what is this? What am I even listening to?
That's exactly how I felt. And I feel that Girls, Girls, Girls is kind of like in between the two, so it's got some better moments to it that you see coming through on Dr. Feelgood, but it's got some of the...
It still has some of that...
The junkier moments
the
from
remnants of Theater of Pain.
Yeah, so... But this, out of their catalog, I mean, this album, you can keep the album cover. The music can just go in the
trash.
bin, in the bin, yeah.
So I've never been a big fan of Panic at the Disco. I like their second album, Pretty Odd, which I think it came out in like 2008, I think it was. I like that album, but really never listened to a whole lot else from the band. And then my kids got into Panic at the Disco, so I started listening to more or other stuff over the last probably 5 or 6 years. So when they released their last album, because the band broke up after the release of this came out in 2022. This is Viva Las Vengeance is the name of the album. I didn't have like super high expectations for it. I thought their last couple of albums were pretty good. Nothing like mind-blowing. But then I listened to this, and I listened to it one time, and it's probably one of the worst albums of the last 5 or 6 years.
Oh wow,
I mean, it is, at least I'll say one of the worst albums I've listened to over the last several years. There's nothing redeeming on here. Any of the good moments that Panic at the Disco had on their last couple of albums are gone on this one. Like I said, the singles aren't good. There's just nothing to even listen to on this album. It's really disappointing because this is the end of the band. This is how they ended their career. And it's kind of a bad note to go out on, I think.
So my next one, I'm a big fan of the band Blues Traveler, but to be completely honest, their last decade or so has been a little weak.
To say the least.
To say the least. Well, their last couple albums have been mostly cover albums anyway.
Well, so. the last blues cover album that they had was actually pretty good.
Yeah, they did two. They did one, well, two. There's a blue one. It was the first one, and the second was like a purple one.
Yeah.
I haven't bought them. I've listened to them. They're good, but like I said, they're mostly covers. I forgot what year it came out. I want to say it was like 2015. It's called Blow Up the Moon. I don't like it. Even though I've been slightly disappointed with some of the albums that came before it, and definitely some of the ones that came after it, that one was the biggest disappointment because it's not even Blues Traveler music in my opinion. Yeah. And I get it. They did a lot of like guest artists on it, which
it breaks up the sound that Blues Travelers had over their career.
Well, I don't know if they even have a sound anymore because I feel like some of those albums were kind of phoned in. That's how they feel. The music is just not. It doesn't have any real.
It doesn't have the heart that their albums normally have.
But Blow Up the Moon is like on a scale much lower than even that, and maybe it shouldn't be because it does have good guest musicians on it. You know, famous artists. It just doesn't work, and I was very disappointed because I was really hoping for kind of an improvement because every band has a slump, and those other albums aren't terrible. But Blow Up the Moon is just very disappointing. Not there. Very disappointing.
The next album I think I'm hoping is just kind of a blip on the radar in this band's discography because I like the stuff they released before it. I've heard really good reviews of their newest album, but when 21 Pilots released Scaled and Icy, I picked this up. I got this, Walmart had it on clearance for like $10, and I thought Blurry Face was a really good album. I think Trench is a really good album. I like some Soft off of Vessel. Those are the three albums that came out before this. They released a new album, I think Clancy is the name of it, earlier this year. I've read some really good reviews on it. I haven't listened to it yet. But I had high expectations for this album when I listened to it. And it's not a horrible album. It sounds like an album that they kind of tossed together of filler stuff or filler tracks that they didn't use on their other albums. I know there's like this overarching theme or story that 21 Pilots has been building up over the last several albums. So maybe it kind of came across as a little forced on this one. It just didn't work as well as some of their other stuff.
So my next one, this was a really highly anticipated album because their first two albums were fantastic. Their compilation of EPs, which was released before that, was really good.
Yeah.
So I think both of us were really looking forward to this album coming out.
Beginning of every year, we do a video about our most anticipated albums.
And this was both.
This was on the. We talked about it in that video.
And it's Starcatcher by Greta Van Fleet. And to be fair, it's not a bad album. No. It's really not. I wouldn't put it on a worst albums of all time list, but coming off of their first two albums, this is a step down. And it could just be that you get that third album slump. A lot of artists get it. Sometimes they get it in their second album, especially if their first one's really big.
Yeah.
I think this is their slump. It's fine. The next album will really be the determining factor, I think. But I've only listened to this album like 3 times, and each time I'm like, this isn't catching me at all.
So my issue with this album is I think the songs are good.
Yeah.
The production on this album is horrible. And you can barely hear the vocals in a lot of the songs. They're way too buried into the music. So I think the production issues,
so maybe it could use a remastering kind of thing.
Maybe.
And down the road, I'm sure it will be.
I think some of the songs are good.
Yeah.
It just the way that they're produced on this album, they just don't work.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with any of the songs on it necessarily. I just, like I said, it could just be a matter of high expectations. Yeah. I've only listened to it on Spotify, so you're not going to get any real
There's no
way to judge the quality of the mix on Spotify. Yeah. So I really didn't catch all that, but because when it came out, I was super excited. I didn't want to wait to go and buy it, so I was listening to it on Spotify, and it just wasn't catching me. And then I just kind of forgot about it. I didn't have any intention of buying it. I will eventually buy it, just because I'm a completist. But it might depend on their next album. If their next album is kind of like this,
It
maybe
might
I
not.
won't.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I'll just stick with their first 2 albums.
Yeah.
But it's very unfortunate. I just think I'm at this point. I'm just going to say this was just a slump in the band's history, and that's okay because every band has it.
So the next album is one I might get a little pushback on because it was a hugely popular album, sold like over 4 million copies, hit number 1 on the Billboard charts. It was nominated for a Grammy. I just remember listening to it and thinking to myself, there's one good song on this album and some okay tracks. There's nothing like super bad on here. Like I said, one great track and then some filler stuff I really feel like. But that is Stormfront by Billy Joel. I love Billy Joel. I love his 70s stuff. I love a lot of his 80s stuff also.
Early 80s stuff.
Even into the early part of the 90s, he had some really good music. And then I listened to this album. Obviously, We Didn't Start the Fire is on this album. And that's the whole reason I listened to this. So this came out in 89, so it's probably somewhere shortly late 89, early part of 1990 when I listened to it. You know, and I like that one track. And then outside of that, there's really nothing on this album that really kind of pulls me back to it outside of We Didn't Start the Fire.
Yeah, I only know that song off this album. I was never a huge Billy Joel fan. I'm probably more of a fan now than I ever was younger.
Yeah.
But that's really not saying that much. So I'm not really familiar with any of the songs on here other than the hit.
Yeah.
So
this is an album that when it got reissued a few years ago or a couple years ago, I don't remember exactly when it was that got reissued. I almost didn't buy it. I bought it, and before I bought it, I went through and streamed it a couple of times. And prior to streaming it, I actually thought even worse of this album. And that's when I was like, okay, maybe this isn't as bad as I thought it was. Yes, it's got We Didn't Start the Fire on it. There's a couple other good tracks on there, okay tracks on there. And that's why I decided to buy it. But really, it's an album I don't really listen to very often.
yeah. So my last one, I've talked about this album a lot, about how I don't like it. But
Which is funny because I love this album. But
I'm going to surprise you here. So, 3 Doors Down, Away from the Sun. When this came out, I hated it. I'm still not a big fan. But last time I was over here, we were recording, Nick threw this on. And I was listening, I'm like, maybe I'll give it another shot. So I've streamed it. It's not as bad as I remember.
Okay. Well, that's a start.
It's a start. But it was still a hugely disappointing album coming off of their first album, which I loved. Still do love. Maybe I need a few more listens. Maybe I'll come around to it even more. I don't know. It definitely was the way when I listened to it, it definitely hit me differently listening to it again now, 15 years later?
Something like that.
So, but it was, like I said, still a huge disappointment. I bought it the day it came out on CD, and because I was super excited, threw it on. I was like, oh, okay, maybe I need to. It never grew on me. I just felt that it was a rehash of the things I didn't like of the first album.
And that's kind of with the way I've always looked at it. It is very different than their first album. I think their first album is a better album, and I think with Away from the Sun, they took some of those like top 40 kind of moments
and just kind of replicated that. And
so I definitely understand some of the criticism of this album. I think there are still some really great tracks on here. A couple of my favorite tracks from the band are on this album.
So that being said, I'm putting in this list because at the time, hugely disappointed, but I'm going to reevaluate it more.
Yeah.
Just to be fair, because like I said, after you were playing, I was like, okay, maybe I'll give it another shot. I did, and it did.
You're like, okay,
it landed better.
It's not great, but it's not horrible.
But maybe a few more listens. I've had albums in the past where it took several listens to get to, to a point where I was, engaged.
Okay with that.
So this one just maybe took the longest. But we'll see. But again, when it came out, hugely disappointed.
Well, that's all we got for you today, guys. Thanks for checking the show out. Make sure you drop us a comment down below. Let us know what some of your most disappointing albums are. I had a longer list. I kind of pared it down to those 4. But let us know what you guys think. Like always, if you enjoyed the episode, make sure you see a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button down below. That's all we got. Until next time.
Talk to y'all later.
Keep on spinning. Peace.